Two men want to rob an old lady, but they don't know what awaits them. Mrs. Ekaterina Ivanovna, an elderly woman living in a small town in America, always starts her day with slow steps through the park near her home. She loves nature and the sense of peace that the fresh mornings bring. For her, taking a walk every day is not just a habit, but also a way to connect with herself and enjoy a simple, peaceful life. Always by her side is Nida, the loyal and intelligent German Shepherd. Nida is not only a companion, but also a source of spiritual strength for Mrs. Ekaterina. Every morning, they walk together along the small paths covered with fallen yellow leaves, where the air is always filled with the fragrance of plants and the gentle sunlight filters through the canopy. This park, with its tranquility and familiarity, has long become a second home for both of them. In those moments, Mrs. Ekaterina often looked at Nida with loving eyes, as if the dog were an indispensable part of her life. Sometimes she smiled, stroking Nida's soft fur, and said, "You are always here with me, aren't you?" Those simple words seemed to need no answer, for Nida's intelligent gaze seemed to affirm them. That scene is not only peaceful but also filled with emotion. The image of an elderly woman and her loyal dog together every morning evokes a deep bond and unconditional trust between humans and pets. Their story, starting from tranquility, contains unexpected twists that few could foresee. On a morning that seemed as peaceful as any other day, Mrs. Ekaterina and Nida walked together along the familiar path in the park. The yellow leaves covering the ground rustled softly underfoot, and the gentle morning sunlight painted a serene, tranquil picture. Mrs. Ekaterina smiled gently, savoring each moment of tranquility with her loyal dog by her side. However, that peaceful scene was suddenly torn apart by the unexpected appearance of two men. They slowly approached, their gait unsteady, as if they had just stepped out of a bar. The faint smell of alcohol in the air clearly indicated their drunken state. However, what made Mrs. Ekaterina feel more uneasy was the cold and malicious gaze that both of them directed at her. In an instant, the atmosphere seemed to become heavy and tense, completely contrasting with the tranquility of the previous morning. One of the two men, with a sneering, mocking smile, stepped forward and looked straight at Mrs. Ekaterina. His voice, though slurred from alcohol, carried a clear threat. "Old lady, hand over your handbag. If not, don't blame us." He stopped, his eyes challenging, while his accomplice beside him burst into gleeful laughter, adding with a disdainful tone, "That's right, you don't want to get into trouble. It's better to do as we say." The familiar path, once a place of safety for Mrs. Ekaterina and Nida, now suddenly feels strange and frightening. The rays of sunlight filtering through the leaves seemed to lose their warmth, replaced by a tense atmosphere that felt like it was suffocating everything around. Mrs. Ekaterina instinctively tightened the leash on Nida, her heart pounding with fear. She tried to maintain her composure, but her eyes betrayed her worry. The peaceful atmosphere of the park is now no different from an underground battlefield, where an unexpected threat is gradually escalating. But she was not alone. Standing beside her, Nida began to clearly sense the approaching danger, the dog's gaze becoming focused and tense. Something is about to happen, and this situation will not just be a simple threat. When Mrs. Ekaterina had not yet figured out what to do, Nida, her loyal dog, acted decisively. As if sensing the danger threatening her owner, Nida immediately shifted into a state of high alert. The fur on its back bristled, its ears perked up, and with a focused gaze, the dog let out a loud bark that echoed throughout the park. The sudden bark of Nida made both men freeze for a moment. A noticeable change occurred on their faces, from the initial mocking expression to confusion and worry. But before they had a chance to react, Nida charged in with incredible speed. Its goal was clear: to protect its master at all costs. With the extraordinary strength of a German Shepherd, Nida charged straight at the nearest man. With a powerful leap, Nida knocked him to the ground. He tried to struggle, but Nida gave him no chance. With its powerful jaws and firm grip, the dog resolutely pinned him to the ground. Each growl of Nida echoed, making not only the robber but also those around feel its ferocity. The other man, witnessing this scene, immediately panicked. His gaze wavered, and in a moment of fear, he decided to run away. No longer displaying his initial arrogance or aggression, he turned and ran frantically from the scene, leaving his comrades struggling under Nida's claws. His staggered and hurried footsteps only made the fear surrounding him more evident. Nida, although she could easily switch to chasing the second thief, still held the first thief firmly on the ground. Its intelligence is demonstrated by not leaving its position to protect its owner, maintaining a defensive stance, and always being in a state of readiness. This is not just an instinctive reaction, but also the action of a loyal dog, always prioritizing the safety of its owner above all else. Nida's brave and decisive actions not only kept Mrs. Ekaterina safe, but also sent a powerful message. Its love and loyalty are unshakable. In the most dangerous moment, Nida proved that it was not just a companion, but also a reliable protector, ready to face any challenge to safeguard its owner. While the situation was still tense, some passers-by began to gather, drawn by Nida's loud barking and the panicked screams of the robber being subdued. Realizing the urgent situation, a few people quickly took out their phones to call the police, describing the incident and the location in detail. No one dared to get too close, as they understood that any careless action could make the situation more serious. Just a few minutes later, the sound of police sirens broke the tense atmosphere in the park. 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt at the curb, and the police officers immediately stepped out, quickly advancing to the scene. They quickly assessed the situation. Nida was still pinning the robber to the ground, her fur bristled, her sharp eyes fixed on the stranger. The robber, in a state of extreme fear, was almost too weak to struggle. A police officer gently approached Mrs. Ekaterina, reassuring her that everything was under control, while also praising Nida's bravery. After that, they signaled her to call Nida away from the robber so the police could handcuff him. Only when she heard the familiar voice of Mrs. Ekaterina did Nida relax, but she still stood close to her, her eyes watching every movement around them. Meanwhile, another police team began to scour the area in search of the second accomplice. Although he quickly fled as soon as he saw the unfavorable situation, with information from witnesses and security cameras in the area, the police easily traced the clues. Only the next morning was the second suspect discovered and arrested in a nearby area, where he was hiding in a desperate attempt to avoid being captured. The quick coordination among bystanders, the support of modern technology, and the timely response of the police ensured that both robbers were apprehended. Not only that, Nida's heroic actions also left a deep impression on everyone who witnessed it. A dangerous situation was resolved safely and neatly, thanks to the bravery of the loyal dog and the sense of responsibility of those around. After everything was completely over, the atmosphere in the park gradually returned to tranquility. But in Mrs. Ekaterina's heart, the echoes of fear, mixed with intense emotion, still lingered. She stood still for a moment, looking around to make sure that the danger had passed. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes lit up with gratitude as she looked at Nida, the loyal friend who had just protected her from the most dangerous situation of her life. Nida, now back to her usual gentle self, stood close to her, her tail wagging lightly as if to reassure her owner that everything was all right. Mrs. Ekaterina knelt down, tightly embracing the dog in her arms, unable to hold back the tears streaming down her cheeks. Those were not tears of fear, but of deep gratitude and overwhelming pride. "Thank you, Nida. You saved me," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. The aged hand caressed Nida's soft fur, as if wanting to convey all the love she had for it. Nida gently licked her hand, its intelligent and affectionate gaze seeming to say that protecting her was the most natural thing it could do. That moment was truly special, a silent connection between humans and pets, where loyalty and love were more evident than ever. Mrs. Ekaterina, despite her old age, has never felt so protected and loved. And Nida, not just a dog, but a friend, a true hero in her heart. In the days following the incident, Mrs. Ekaterina's life seemed to return to its familiar rhythm, but within her there were profound changes. Every morning, she still walks with Nida along the small path in the park, where sunlight filters through the vibrant yellow leaves and the fresh air brings a sense of peace. However, this time, with each step she took, there was a stronger faith than ever before, a faith in Nida, her loyal companion, who was always by her side, no matter what happened. The park, once a familiar space for relaxation, now holds a greater significance. It is not only a place for her to immerse herself in nature, but also a place that has proven Nida's love and loyalty to her. Every little corner, from the familiar path to the shaded tree trunks, reminds her of the brave moment when the dog protected her, disregarding the danger. Ekaterina no longer feels anxious or hesitant when going for a walk. Instead, she feels a sense of peace and absolute safety. Every time she looked at Nida, with her bright eyes, strong gait, and ever-wagging tail, her heart would swell with love and pride. Nida is not just a dog. She is a symbol of protection, loyalty, and unconditional love that not everyone is fortunate enough to have. From that day on, Ekaterina walked through each morning with more confidence and peace than ever before. And even as time passes, the image of Nida protecting her in that moment of danger will forever be the most vivid testament to a special relationship where loyalty and love always exist, never to be shaken.